Before the first pyramids rose from the sands of Egypt, long before Babylon's walls or Rome's foundations, people in the Americas were already building. They carved mountains into terraces, shaped rivers into canals, and aligned cities with the stars. From the deserts of Peru to the forests of the Mississippi, their civilizations flourished in silence, without wheels, without metal, and without written words, yet they measured time, mastered engineering, and built monuments that still defy understanding. For centuries, their story was buried under earth, forest, and myth. Only now, through archaeology and satellite vision, do their outlines return. Roads beneath the jungle, cities beneath the plains, designs written in soil and stone. Tonight, we travel through those forgotten worlds, the terraces, the mounds, the lines, and the roads that prove civilization in the Americas began far earlier than we ever imagined. Join us and listen as the earth remembers. The forgotten foundations. In the high plains of Bolivia, near the cold blue waters of Lake Titicaca, lie the ruins of Tiwanaku. Massive sandstone blocks, carved with geometric precision, rest at odd angles on the altiplano, some weighing over 100 tons. The site sits nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, where the air is thin and vegetation sparse. Archaeologists once thought it was Incan, but radiocarbon analysis from the 20th century revealed something far older. Pottery fragments and skeletal remains suggest the city was thriving around 1500 BCE, long before the Inca Empire, and long before Egypt's New Kingdom built its later temples. Yet some local Aymara traditions whisper that the stones themselves predate even the ancestors, that Tiwanaku was raised by the first men who spoke with thunder and shaped the earth with sound. Nearby lies Pumapunku, a smaller site, but perhaps more mysterious. Its blocks are cut with such accuracy that even modern engineers have paused to study their right angles and interlocking joints. The stone is andesite, harder than granite, and appears to have been quarried miles away, across what would have been swampy terrain. The ruins show no written record, no inscriptions, only silent geometry. Bolivian archaeologist Carlos Ponce Sanginés noted that Tiwanaku's core walls are aligned with celestial points, suggesting astronomical function. Every June 21st, on the winter solstice, the first rays of sunrise pass through the eastern gateway of the Kalasaya temple, illuminating a single central monolith. Far north, in Mexico's Valley of Mexico, the city of Teotihuacan rises out of the plains. Its Avenue of the Dead, lined with truncated pyramids, stretches nearly 2 miles. The Pyramid of the Sun stands at 216 feet, almost identical in height to the Great Pyramid's truncated upper section if measured at similar ratios. Yet Teotihuacan predates the Aztecs by more than 1,000 years. When the Aztecs arrived, they called it the place where gods were born. Archaeological layers show the earliest construction began around 400 BCE, but the city's core expansion occurred by 100 CE. The builders remain unnamed. Their writing, if it existed, has not survived. Excavations in the 1,960 seconds uncovered a tunnel beneath the Pyramid of the Sun, filled with mica sheets, an insulating mineral often used in electrical and thermal shielding today. The mica was traced to Brazil, over 1,500 miles away. Its purpose remains unknown. Some researchers, like archaeologist Saburo Sugiyama, argue it had ritual significance, symbolizing reflection or the underworld. Others quietly suggest it may indicate a trade network spanning the continent centuries before Roman roads existed. Across the Yucatan Peninsula, the Mayan lowlands preserved another kind of legacy, one written in glyphs and calendars. But beneath their classical cities lie older layers. At sites like Cuello in Belize, radiocarbon tests of early ceramics show human habitation around 2,600 BCE, roughly contemporary with Egypt's first pharaoh. Nama. In Guatemala's Mirador Basin, the lost city of El Mirador was rediscovered in the 20th century, its vast plazas and temples buried under rainforest. Laser scanning LiDAR revealed a network of causeways stretching over 100 miles, linking hundreds of sites. The central pyramid, Ladanta, rises 230 feet, larger in total volume than Giza's Great Pyramid. It dates to around 800 BCE, when Egypt's new kingdom was in decline. Farther south, in Peru's Supe Valley, lies a site that quietly rewrote the continent's timeline. Caral, discovered in 1948 and studied intensively by archaeologist Ruth Shady Solis in the 1,990 seconds, is now recognized as the oldest known city in the Americas. Radiocarbon analysis places it at roughly 2,600 BCE, the same era as Egypt's earliest pyramids. But Caral's pyramids were built without war, without weapons, and seemingly without defensive walls. Musical instruments made from condor bones were found among the ruins, along with woven reed baskets and fragments of cotton. At its center stands the Great Pyramid, 60 feet tall, built from river stones carried by hand. Caral's discovery reshaped archaeology. It implied that organized civilization in the Americas emerged independently, parallel to Sumer and Egypt. Yet Caral's builders left no carvings of kings or deities. Their art was abstract, their temples oriented to seasonal winds and lunar cycles. Dr. Shady wrote in her notes, "Their power came from persuasion, not force." She believed Caral's leaders ruled through ritual and trade, not conquest. The nearby Andes provided minerals, the coast, anchovies and salt. Textiles showed dye traces of indigo, predating its known use in Egypt by centuries. On the northern coast of Peru, near Trujillo, another ancient culture rose. The Moche. Their adobe pyramids, the Huaca del Sol and Huaca de la Luna, were built between 100 BCE and 800 CE. Though younger than Caral, the Moche displayed a technological mastery that rivaled any early Old World civilization. Their metallurgists produced alloys of gold, silver, and copper using advanced smelting techniques. One Moche mask, found in 1987, contained layers of differently colored metals fused without modern soldering. The Moche were also engineers of irrigation, channeling rivers through desert valleys long before Spanish colonists arrived. Far inland in the dense Amazon basin, recent aerial surveys have uncovered geometric earthworks, ditches, roads, and mounds hidden beneath centuries of forest. Radiocarbon tests suggest some date back to 1000 BCE. Their builders remain unknown, but the layout mirrors that of urban planning seen in other early American sites: concentric rings, radial paths, and open plazas. Environmental cores from the soil revealed charcoal layers, indicating controlled burning, a kind of agriculture now called terra preta. The presence of this dark, fertile soil implies sustained habitation, not wilderness. In North America, near present-day Louisiana, stands Poverty Point, an arrangement of massive concentric ridges and mounds, built around 1700 BCE. Archaeologists estimate nearly 750,000 cubic meters of earth were moved by hand, without beasts of burden or wheels. The largest mound, Mound A, rises 70 feet. Excavations show trade items from as far away as the Great Lakes and the Gulf Coast. It was a ceremonial center, built by a culture that predated written language yet organized massive communal labor. The scale rivals the construction of Stonehenge. If one were to draw a line through time from Caral to Tiwanaku, from Poverty Point to Teotihuacan, it would show civilizations rising across the Americas while the pyramids of Egypt still glowed under the desert sun. Yet each was isolated by oceans, unaware of the other. Their shared traits, monumental architecture, astronomical alignments, social complexity, appeared not as copies, but as echoes. independent inventions that followed similar paths of observation and necessity. In 2018, LiDAR mapping across Central America revealed over 60,000 previously unknown structures buried under jungle canopy. Archaeologists now believe that by 500 BCE, the Americas supported complex societies numbering in the tens of millions. Their cities have mostly returned to Earth, their names lost, their builders remembered only through the angles of stone and the silence of terraces reclaimed by vines. The oldest ruins do not announce themselves with grandeur. They sit half-buried, their stairways leading to nothing, their plazas flooded by rain. But in their quiet geometry, they suggest something profound, that human civilization, in its earliest forms, was not confined to the banks of the Nile or the plains of Mesopotamia. It also breathed, planned, and built beneath the vast skies of the Americas. The city beneath the sand. The Supe Valley lies in silence, about 200 kilometers north of Lima. The river that cuts through its dry landscape has carved terraces where once stood the city, now called Corral. From a distance, it looks like a series of low hills. But as the light changes at dusk, their edges form deliberate angles. The ground reveals ancient platforms, stairways, and plazas made of smooth riverstones. This is not a village. It is one of the oldest known cities in the Americas, older than the pyramids of Giza, older than Stonehenge, older even than written history in much of the world. Archaeologist Ruth Shady Solis began working here in 1994. She walked through wind-blown dust, collecting fragments of woven baskets and reeds. What she found overturned every established timeline. Carbon dating from the earliest layers showed an age of around 2600 BCE. By comparison, Egypt's Great Pyramid at Giza would not rise for another century. The settlement stretched over 150 acres, with 6 major pyramidal structures and several smaller platforms arranged around a central plaza. The people who built it had no pottery, no metal tools, and no signs of warfare. Yet they organized the labor of thousands. The Great Pyramid of Caral stands nearly 60 feet high. Its steps are built from shikra-woven reed bags filled with stones, stacked layer by layer. The method absorbs seismic shocks, an adaptation that has allowed the pyramids to withstand 4,000 years of earthquakes. Excavations at the base uncovered offering pits filled with shells from the Pacific coast, carved bone flutes, and bundles of burned herbs. The artifacts suggest ritual, not conquest. The air still carries the faint salt of the nearby ocean, hinting at a civilization tied to both sea and river. At the heart of the complex lies a circular sunken plaza, its diameter nearly 20 meters. Archaeologists believe it was a place of gathering, perhaps for festivals or ceremonies that followed the cycles of the moon. From this plaza, pathways radiate outward to the pyramids. One structure, the Templo Mayor, was oriented toward the rising sun during the summer solstice. Another, called the Amphitheater Pyramid, contained evidence of fire pits used repeatedly across centuries. The remains of charred quinoa and cotton seeds were found among the ashes. The inhabitants of Caral grew cotton, beans, and squash on the riverbanks. They used irrigation channels to control seasonal flooding. Their most valuable crop was cotton spun into threads for nets that fueled a thriving trade with fishing villages along the coast. Archaeologists uncovered nets, cords, and textiles dyed with colors that predate similar techniques in Egypt by centuries. The abundance of marine shells at the inland site shows constant exchange between coast and highlands. Carroll's influence stretched more than 30 kilometers along the valley, linking smaller settlements into what scholars now call the Norte Chico civilization. Unlike later empires, Norte Chico left no carvings of rulers or gods. Their art was geometric spirals, lines, and patterns woven into textiles or painted onto gourds. Shady once remarked that this society was built on cooperation, not coercion. No weapons have been found among the ruins, no fortifications, no signs of warfare. Yet the scale of their architecture rivals those of early Mesopotamia. The city seems to have thrived through ritual authority leaders who maintained cosmic balance through offerings and song rather than force. Among the most curious discoveries were the flutes. Made from condor and pelican bones, they still produce clear notes when played. In a 2002 excavation, a set of 32 flutes was found carefully arranged beside a staircase. Their wear marks suggest long use. When reproduced and tested, their sound resembled the tones of Andean panpipes still played today. The continuity of music across millennia hints at unbroken memory, even as languages and cities vanished. The desert winds have preserved what rain could not destroy. Carroll's adobe and stone walls remain sharp under sunlight, and aerial surveys show its symmetry. Pyramids align to the cardinal directions, each complex connected by pathways that once guided processions. Night photography reveals that fires once burned in specific corners, possibly marking astronomical events. Researchers believe its priests watched the stars from elevated platforms, tracking solstices to time planting and harvests. Further down the Supe Valley, smaller settlements, Aspero, Miraya, and Lurihuasi mirror Carroll's layout. Each has its own plaza, its own pyramids, and its own signs of communal labor. The pattern suggests a network of allied centers, perhaps governed by shared ritual rather than political control. Some scholars compare this system to early Sumerian city-states, but without evidence of warfare or conquest. It was civilization by consensus, shaped through belief. In 2001, Carroll was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, yet despite global recognition, its silence remains undisturbed. There are no carved names, no kings or queens remembered. Only terraces, stairways, and shadows stretching across the sand. The architecture suggests order, planning, and mathematical understanding. The builders measured with chords, leveled with water, and aligned with celestial points. But they built without walls, as if defense was unnecessary. At night, when wind moves through the valley, it passes over fluted stones and hollow chambers. Locals say it sounds like distant singing, the same tones that may have echoed here thousands of years ago. Archaeologists have recorded the resonance of some chambers, noting that sound amplifies inside them, perhaps part of their original design. Rituals may have been conducted with music that carried across the desert plain, uniting thousands in rhythm. Carroll's legacy reshaped how scholars viewed the Americas. It proved that complex society emerged here independently, not as a reflection of Old World influence. The people of Carroll built cities when Egypt and Sumer were still young. They organized trade routes, engineered irrigation, and developed symbolic systems that may have prefigured later Andean quipus, the knotted cords used for record keeping. Even without writing, they communicated across valleys and centuries through architecture, sound, and shared design. Today, the site still yields discoveries: buried chambers, reed baskets intact, traces of pigments used in murals. Each excavation deepens the timeline. Each layer uncovers a more intricate picture of a people who measured their world not in conquest, but in cycles of sun and wind. The stones remain where they were placed 5 millennia ago, warmed by the same sun, waiting for meaning to return through patient eyes. The silent engineers of the Andes. High in the mountains of Peru, where thin air meets shifting clouds, the ancient engineers of the Andes shaped a world of stone, water, and terraces. Long before the rise of the Inca, long before the first European mapmakers drew lines across South America, people here were moving earth, cutting channels, and building walls that would still stand thousands of years later. Their names are mostly forgotten, but their designs remain etched into the mountainsides like quiet signatures of patience. Archaeological evidence traces this engineering lineage back to the descendants of the Norte Chico and Carol cultures. Around 1800 BCE, the Andean highlands began to host a network of settlements connected by trade and ritual. One of the earliest, Chavin de Huantar, sits at 3,200 meters above sea level, where two rivers meet in the shadow of the Cordillera Blanca. Built around 900 BCE, it became a ceremonial center and a laboratory of architecture. The builders learned how to channel water through subterranean ducts to create a constant, echoing roar beneath the temple floor. This sound, amplified by carved stone ducts, may have been used in rituals, giving the illusion of the earth speaking back. The Chavin culture introduced a new architectural principle, the idea that stone and sound could work together. The lanzon, a 4.5-meter granite monolith, carved with the fanged deity that symbolized duality, stands in a narrow, dimly lit chamber. When torches flickered against its polished surface, shadows transformed it into movement. The priests who stood before it likely used sound flutes, conch shells, and rushing water to induce awe. Engineering was not separate from belief. It was the language through which power and nature spoke as one. Outside the temples, terraces spread along the mountainsides. They were not the monumental terraces of later Incan construction, but small, curved systems that followed the natural contours of the slopes. These early terraces controlled erosion, stored moisture, and allowed crops like quinoa and potatoes to thrive at high altitudes. Archaeologists studying pollen from soil layers near Lake Junin found evidence of controlled agriculture dating as far back as 2000 BCE, implying that long before monumental architecture, the Andes were already an engineered ecosystem. As centuries passed, the descendants of these mountain builders expanded their mastery of stone. The Wari civilization, flourishing around 600 CE near modern-day Ayacucho, constructed cities with orthogonal street plans, canals, and reservoirs. Their capital, also called Wari, covered nearly 2,000 acres and housed tens of thousands of people. The city's water systems were built from interlocking stone conduits, some still functional today. Archaeologists have traced these channels through hillsides, showing how the Wari used hydraulic pressure to move water uphill, something that puzzled early explorers but is now understood as deliberate gradient control. Farther south, in the Sihuas Valley, engineers built terraces using stones bound without mortar, yet fitted so tightly that air could barely pass between them. These structures preserved temperature and moisture, allowing for consistent crop yields in cold, dry conditions. The Andean builders had no written manuals, yet their understanding of thermal regulation and hydrology rivaled that of later civilizations across the ocean. In the northern highlands, at Cajamarca and Kuntuawasi, archaeologists found evidence of early surveying methods. Straight alignments between temple sites, rivers, and mountain peaks suggest the use of astronomical sightlines. The builders seem to design with both earth and sky in mind, constructing not only for utility but for harmony with celestial cycles. Some terraces align with solstice sunrises, others mark lunar extremes. When rain clouds rolled over the Andes, their shadows traced these same lines, turning land into a calendar. By the time the Inca Empire emerged in the 13th century, this engineering knowledge had been refined across millennia. Yet the Inca did not invent it, they inherited it. Their masterwork, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman above Cusco, was built with stones weighing over 300 tons, each shaped to fit without cement. The technology that allowed such precision was not spontaneous genius, but the culmination of generations of craftsmen who understood how to read stone as if it were soft. The Inca took this inheritance further, building roads that stitched the continent together from Ecuador to Chile. But traces of earlier paths, buried under Incan ones, show that routes already existed centuries before their empire. One such path, near Nazca, follows the dry riverbeds and lines etched into the desert. These lines, enormous geoglyphs visible only from above, predate the Inca by over 1,000 years. Their builders moved millions of stones to reveal the lighter earth beneath, creating figures of birds, monkeys, and trapezoids aligned with celestial directions. Some researchers believe they were ritual walkways used to summon rain, guided by the same hydrological awareness that built the terraces. To the Andean engineers, water was sacred. Every channel, every basin was designed to follow its flow rather than resist it. Near Cusco, the Tipon complex demonstrates this philosophy. Built between 1000 and 1200 CE, it channels mountain springs into stone fountains that cascade with perfect symmetry. The gradient of each channel remains constant, allowing water to flow without erosion. Even after centuries of neglect, the system still works. Hydraulic engineers who studied Tipon in the 20th century described it as a balance between gravity and intention. Throughout the Andes, these builders mastered the invisible. They understood how heat moves through rock, how moisture gathers under soil, how pressure changes with altitude. They built terraces not only to grow food, but to stabilize slopes and store water underground. They carved drainage into temple floors to prevent flooding. Every act of construction doubled as a study of natural law. The most haunting thing about their legacy is how little remains of their names. No single ruler or scribe recorded their deeds. Their monuments speak through function, not inscription. The stones fit together with an understanding that seems closer to instinct than calculation. Archaeologists examining their layouts often note ratios that approach modern mathematical constants. One platform at Ollantaytambo, for instance, forms an angle of exactly 45 degrees to the horizon, mirroring the winter solstice sunrise. From the valley of Cajamarca to the shores of Lake Titicaca, ancient engineering formed a quiet continuum knowledge passed without writing, measured by observation and repetition. Even today, farmers in Andean villages maintain terrace systems first built 3,000 years ago. They use the same irrigation channels, the same field boundaries, the same rhythm of planting tied to the stars. It is easy to imagine these landscapes as ruins, yet in truth they are still alive stone machines that breathe with rain and light. The Andes remember through construction, not story. Each stone placed was both a calculation and a prayer, designed to last as long as the mountains themselves. The giants of stone and water. At nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, the air grows thin and brittle. The horizon widens into a pale band of light over the Bolivian Altiplano, and from that wind-beaten plain rises Tiwanaku. The city sits near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, a landscape that once held more water, more life, and perhaps more people than it does today. In this frozen plateau, where little grows and nights drop below freezing, ancient builders moved stones heavier than modern cranes could easily lift. They carved them with accuracy, measured in fractions of millimeters, and they aligned them with both stars and solstices. Archaeologists first documented Tiwanaku in the 19th century, describing it as the American Stonehenge. The earliest explorers, like Ephraim Squire and Arthur Poznański, argued that its ruins must predate all known civilizations of the Andes. Poznański, who mapped and studied the site for decades, suggested that it was built around 15,000 BCE, based on astronomical alignments, an estimate far older than current evidence supports, but one that shows how ancient it appeared even to those first investigators. Later, radiocarbon dating adjusted the timeline to around 500 BCE, with the city flourishing by 700 CE. Yet even that makes it older than most of the monumental structures in South America. The first thing one notices at Tiwanaku is not the size of the site, but the silence. Blocks of red sandstone and andesite lie scattered across the field. Some are carved with intricate angles, others with faces and hands folded against their bodies. The semi-subterranean temple holds hundreds of stone heads, each with distinct features, as if representing many peoples. The largest statue, nearly 3 meters tall, holds a ceremonial cup in one hand and a staff in the other. It faces the Kalasasaya, a great rectangular platform whose walls are built from massive monoliths standing upright. The Kalasasaya was not simply a temple. Its outer walls functioned as a solar calendar. The sun rises and sets between specific stones at the equinoxes and solstices. On June 21st, during the winter solstice of the southern hemisphere, the first rays of dawn pass precisely through the eastern gate and strike the central monolith inside the courtyard. Thousands still gather to watch it each year, wearing traditional Aymara clothing, waiting in silence for that line of light to appear. To the west of the main complex lies Puma Punku, a smaller but more puzzling site. Here, immense andesite blocks are shaped with such precision that even a thin sheet of metal cannot fit between their joints. Some blocks feature complex interlocking patterns, dovetail joints, and recessed channels techniques unknown in other ancient American sites. The largest blocks weigh over 130 tons. The quarry for this stone was located more than 10 kilometers away, across what would have been marshland. The logistics of their transport remain uncertain. Researchers have proposed sledges, ramps, and reed boats across seasonal lakes, but no single theory explains it fully. In 1997, a joint Bolivian-German survey used 3D laser scanning to model the site. The results showed a geometric precision comparable to modern machine-cut surfaces. Toolmarks suggest the use of percussion drills tipped with harder minerals, possibly hematite or obsidian. Yet none of the supposed tools have been found. The builders seem to have vanished, leaving no inscriptions, no tombs, and no clear record of how or why the city was abandoned. The mystery deepens when one considers Tiwanaku's hydrology. The entire site is interlaced with stone drains, channels, and basins designed to manage rainfall and prevent flooding during the wet season. The elevation and the lake's shifting water levels would have required constant adjustment, yet the system endured for centuries. Archaeologist Alexei Vranich, who has reconstructed the site digitally, calls it an engineered landscape disguised as ritual architecture. The combination of function and symbolism runs through every feature. The Akapana pyramid, for example, resembles a stepped hill when viewed from above. It was designed with a drainage system that carried rainwater from its summit down carved channels shaped like puma heads, emptying into underground conduits that returned water to the earth. This fusion of stone and water reflected Tiwanaku's cosmology. To the people who lived there, the lake was not just geography, it was the source of creation. Their myths spoke of Viracocha, the great creator god, who rose from the waters of Titicaca to shape the world. The city's layout mirrored that myth. Platforms rising like islands, canals like veins, stairways descending into pools. The architecture itself was a prayer written in stone. Artifacts from the site reveal a vast sphere of influence. Ceramics and textiles bearing Tiwanaku motifs have been found as far away as Chile and Argentina. Llama bones show evidence of long-distance caravan trade. The empire's expansion, at its peak between 700 and 1000 CE, covered much of the southern Andes, though empire may not be the right word. It was more a network of colonies connected by shared ritual and belief than by military conquest. Tiwanaku's priests likely governed through ceremony, redistributing food and goods from raised field farms around the lake. These fields camelones were another engineering marvel. They used alternating strips of elevated earth and water channels to protect crops from frost and to create microclimates. Modern agricultural experiments have shown they still outperform many contemporary irrigation systems. When the climate shifted around 1000 CE, drought reduced Lake Titicaca's size and exposed the canals. The raised fields dried, and Tiwanaku's population declined. Its temples fell silent, its stones scattered by earthquakes and centuries of looting. But the people who once built there did not vanish completely. Their descendants carried fragments of the old knowledge into later Andean cultures, into the Inca, who called Lake Titicaca the birthplace of their first rulers, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo. In 2000, sonar mapping revealed submerged ruins beneath the lake itself, terraces, walls, and what may be the remains of a temple complex. Divers recovered carved stone vessels and offerings of gold leaf, suggesting that Tiwanaku's sacred geography extended beneath the water. Whether these were built during a lower lake phase or intentionally submerged is still unknown. The lake continues to shift, hiding and revealing, as it has for thousands of years. Standing at the site today, one sees the Andes rising in the distance, snow peaks mirrored in the lake's surface. The wind moves between the stones with a low hum, a sound like distant breath. The precision of the cuts, the alignment of the gateways, the silent geometry, each detail speaks of minds that understood their world not through machines or metal, but through patience, rhythm, and balance. The giants of stone and water left no language we can read, but their work endures in weight and angle, in the way sunlight moves across a doorway at dawn, in the reflection of the sky on still water. Their civilization remains a question written into the mountains, waiting for translation not in words, but in understanding. The city of fire and feather, in the high valley of central Mexico, where the air hums with stillness and the earth smells faintly of volcanic dust, stands Teotihuacan, the city of the gods. When the Aztecs first arrived here in the 14th century, the city was already ancient, its streets long abandoned, its walls half buried beneath centuries of ash and silence. They did not know who built it, they only believed that the gods themselves had gathered there to shape the sun and moon. Even today, its name comes from their language Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. Archaeology has shown that this city was not myth, but precision. Around 400 BCE, small farming villages dotted the Valley of Mexico. By 100 BCE, something had changed. Across a grid measuring 8 square miles, builders began raising pyramids, avenues, and plazas on a scale the New World had never seen. The city's population would eventually surpass 100,000, making it one of the largest urban centers on Earth at the time. Yet the names of its rulers, its people, and even its language have vanished. The city's spine, the Avenue of the Dead, runs for nearly 2 miles, perfectly aligned with the setting of the Pleiades and the movement of the sun on certain calendar days. Along its path rise the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Each structure forms part of an astronomical design, markers in stone that follow solstice and zenith, night and fire. The builders seem to think of their city not as architecture, but as a living calendar. The Pyramid of the Sun dominates the landscape. Standing 216 feet high, it is constructed from over 2 million tons of volcanic stone. Beneath it, in 1971, archaeologists led by Jorge Acosta discovered a sealed tunnel. The passage ran over 100 meters toward the pyramid center and opened into a chamber shaped like a cloverleaf. Inside, they found traces of liquid mercury, jade, seashells, and miniature figures arranged as offerings. Mercury, rare and volatile, may have symbolized the underworld rivers described in Mesoamerican mythology, a shining path for the dead or the gods. Farther down the Avenue of the Dead lies the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, dedicated to Quetzalcoatl. Its facade is covered in hundreds of carved head serpents emerging from feathers, alternated with jaguar-like creatures believed to represent storm deities. Archaeologists excavating beneath this pyramid found human sacrifices, men, women, and animals buried with obsidian knives and necklaces of shell and jade. The layout of the burials suggests an ordered ritual rather than war. Each individual was positioned with care, as if meant to serve a cosmic purpose. Teotihuacan's engineers achieved things difficult to explain even today. Its main grid deviates slightly by 15.5 degrees from true north, aligning instead with Cerro Gordo, the mountain seen from the city's northern edge. This alignment mirrors solar events. Twice each year, on April 29 and August 13, the sun passes directly overhead at noon. These dates are separated by 260 days, matching the sacred Mesoamerican calendar still used by the Maya centuries later. The same pattern reappears in other cities influenced by Teotihuacan's design, stretching from Guatemala to the Gulf of Mexico, evidence that its blueprint shaped a continent's belief system. Underneath this vast geometry, life moved with ritual rhythm. The city's houses were not crude huts, but planned apartment compounds with painted walls and drainage systems. Murals discovered in Teotihuacan's residential zones show jaguars blowing conch shells, processions of masked figures, and water flowing from the hands of deities. One of the most famous, from the Tepantitla compound, depicts a great goddess pouring streams of water and seeds onto the earth, surrounded by birds and butterflies. Scholars call her the great goddess of Teotihuacan, a fertility figure who may have represented both life and death. Trade flowed constantly through the city. Obsidian blades, crafted from volcanic glass mined at nearby Pachuca, were shipped hundreds of miles away. Shells from the Pacific and Caribbean, greenstone from Guerrero, cacao from Chiapas, all passed through Teotihuacan's markets. Archaeological layers reveal evidence of foreign quarters, a Zapotec district with Oaxacan pottery, a Maya enclave with Petén-style murals. The city seems to have been a federation of cultures, governed not by conquest, but by commerce and shared religion. Yet for all its scale, Teotihuacan's origin remains obscure. The earliest inhabitants may have been refugees from a volcanic eruption at Cuicuilco around 100 BCE. That disaster, which buried an earlier pyramid under lava, forced thousands to migrate into the valley. They brought knowledge, labor, and ritual traditions. Out of catastrophe, Teotihuacan may have been born a planned sanctuary built from both survival and vision. By 500 CE, it had become the beating heart of Mesoamerica. Its influence stretched to the Maya world, where murals in Tikal and Caminaljuyu depict Teotihuacan emissaries wearing distinctive goggles and feathered headdresses. Archaeologists refer to them as warrior merchants. Yet the city's decline came quietly. Around 600 CE, large sections were burned. Temples were abandoned, murals defaced. The upper city, once home to priests and rulers, collapsed first. The reasons remain unknown: drought, internal revolt, or invasion. The lower city survived for a while longer, until even that fell silent. When the Aztecs rediscovered it nearly 800 years later, they saw ruins aligned so perfectly with heaven that they could only assume divine authorship. They performed pilgrimages along the Avenue of the Dead, believing the gods had once gathered there to ignite the fifth sun, the current age of the world. The old pyramids became shrines again, their builders forgotten, but their purpose renewed through reverence. Modern excavations continue to reveal the unseen layers of Teotihuacan. In 2003, archaeologist Sergio Gomez stumbled upon a hidden tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The passage was filled with thousands of artifacts, carved statues, jade beads, seashells, and more mercury, gleaming like rivers in the torchlight. Drones equipped with cameras found chambers still sealed after nearly 2 millennia. Inside were spheres of gold-colored pyrite, designed to sparkle like stars in the darkness. The tunnel may have represented the cosmic underworld, the origin of creation itself. Standing on the Pyramid of the Sun today, the view stretches across the valley in silent symmetry. The mountains cast long shadows over the grid, and the Avenue of the Dead lies straight as if drawn by an unseen hand. The city's walls are mostly gone, but the plan remains perfect, unchanged by erosion, unbroken by time. It feels less like a ruin than a preserved equation, a map drawn between earth and sky. At sunset, the stones turn red. The wind carries dust across the plaza, where thousands once gathered to watch the fires burn at the solstice. The gods may not have been born here, but something greater was a system of time, space, and order that would ripple across the Americas for centuries. The jungle cities lost to time. In the deep lowlands of Guatemala, where humidity hangs like mist and cicadas fill the air with a steady hum, the jungle conceals the bones of forgotten cities. Beneath roots and vines, beneath centuries of fallen leaves, lie the remains of one of humanity's most complex civilizations, the ancient Maya. For hundreds of years, these cities lay hidden under green mountains that were not mountains at all, but pyramids overtaken by forest. When early explorers stumbled upon them in the 19th century, they could not believe their size. What they saw was only a fraction of what lay beneath the canopy. In 2018, researchers using LiDAR light detection and ranging sent laser pulses from aircraft over northern Guatemala's Petén region. What they discovered rewrote the scale of the ancient world. More than 60,000 previously unknown structures appeared in the data: temples, palaces, causeways, and defensive walls stretching across 800 square miles. Beneath the jungle was a network of urban life, connecting hundreds of cities: El Mirador, Calakmul, Tikal, Nakbay, and others, each linked by elevated roads built centuries before Rome constructed its own empire. El Mirador, the oldest and largest, predates most classical Maya centers. Its main structure, La Danta, rises 230 feet taller in volume than Egypt's Great Pyramid. Archaeological layers show construction began around 800 BCE, during the same centuries when Caral in Peru had long faded into dust. The city covered nearly 10 square miles and may have supported over 100,000 inhabitants. At its height, the Maya lowlands were a mosaic of kingdoms, each ruled from cities of stone and jade, each bound by trade, astronomy, and ritual precision. The jungle swallowed these cities after their fall, but it also preserved them. The humidity that destroys paper-hardened clay and the lack of open roads kept looters away from the most remote sites. LiDAR revealed causeways linking El Mirador to neighboring cities, raised 3 meters above the swampy ground and running perfectly straight for kilometers. They were likely used for religious processions, carrying offerings between temples under the glow of torches. To the Maya, roads were not just paths, they were arteries of the world itself, connecting the heavens, earth, and underworld. At Tikal, a more familiar name in the modern imagination, the jungle rises through temples that pierce the mist. Temple 4 stands 213 feet tall. Its summit, visible above the canopy, like the prow of a ship at sea. Built around 740 CE, it once faced an immense plaza, surrounded by courtyards, palaces, and ball courts. The Maya engineered their cities with precision. Stone reservoirs collected rainwater during the wet season and distributed it through channels during droughts. Excavations have uncovered filtration systems using quartz sand and zeolite materials that purify water even by modern standards. It may be the earliest known use of engineered filtration on Earth. Calakmul, to the north in the Yucatan forests, rivaled Tikal in scale and power. At its center rise 2 pyramids, each larger than most modern buildings, surrounded by thousands of residential structures. The city's population is estimated at 50,000 during its peak between 500 and 800 CE. Glyphs found on its stelae tell of alliances, wars, and rituals, an intricate political world mapped in stone. Yet despite their conflicts, Maya cities shared deep architectural harmony, aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and Venus's cycles. Their calendar, the long count, recorded not years, but cosmic intervals, spans of thousands of days, repeating through time. In El Mirador's main plaza, archaeologist Richard Hansen uncovered stucco friezes depicting the hero twins from the Popol Vuh, the sacred Maya text that survived conquest centuries later. These figures, half human and half divine, descend into the underworld to defeat death itself, only to rise again as the sun and moon. The story was encoded in architecture, stairways that descend into darkness and rise again toward the sky. Every temple mirrored a myth. Every pyramid was both tomb and calendar, both home of gods and stage for human ritual. But for all their grandeur, these cities were sustained by fragile ecosystems. The Maya cleared vast tracts of forest for agriculture and construction. Over centuries, deforestation eroded soil, changing rainfall patterns. Archaeological pollen samples from Petén lakes show a sudden drop in forest species around 800 CE, replaced by grass and weeds, signs of exhaustion. Combined with prolonged droughts, it led to what scholars call the classic Maya collapse. Between 800 and 900 CE, major cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan were abandoned. Populations migrated north to the Yucatan, where cities like Chichen Itza rose for a time before fading as well. LiDAR has shown that even during decline, the Maya world remained interconnected. Smaller towns persisted, using terrace farming and smaller reservoirs to adapt to reduced rainfall. Their architecture shifted from monumental to domestic, from grand pyramids to family compounds. Civilization did not vanish, it transformed. Yet to later eyes, when jungle consumed the walls and vines cracked the plazas, it looked like disappearance. In the still air of Petén, ancient stone holds moisture like breath. Archaeologists working at El Tintal and Nachten describe the experience as walking through green fog, hearing monkeys call where once markets echoed. Excavations reveal traces of red paint still clinging to stucco remnants of colors that once covered entire temples. The Maya did not build in grey. Their cities were painted with cinnabar, jade, and turquoise. The jungle merely took the color back. Modern technology continues to uncover new dimensions. Beneath temples at Teotihuacan, mercury rivers shimmer. In the Maya world, researchers found evidence of vast underground chambers, cenotes, and tunnels connecting temples to natural caves. These were not foundations but spiritual entrances to Xibalba, the underworld of the gods. For the Maya, architecture extended beneath the surface. Life, death, and the divine flowed through layers of stone, water, and time. Today, drone footage over Petén shows endless green interrupted by straight lines roads that refuse to vanish. Each hidden pyramid is a record of human precision achieved with stone tools and patience alone. The jungle swallowed the cities, but not their logic. Their builders understood hydrology, astronomy, and acoustics to degrees only now rediscovered. Whispers of their mathematics live on in their descendants, who still mark the same calendar days, still light fires at ancient stairways, still call the jungle by its old name. In the quiet heat of afternoon, the forest grows still again. Beneath it, the stones wait, preserved by the same elements that hid them. The Maya cities, lost for centuries, are no longer legends. They were real, vast, connected, and ancient beyond the memory of empire. The jungle did not erase them, it protected them, patiently holding their map until we learned again how to see. The mound builders of the north. Across the wide valleys of the Mississippi, the Ohio, and the Louisiana lowlands, long before the arrival of ships from across the Atlantic, people were shaping the earth itself into vast ceremonial landscapes. They had no written language, no stone monuments, no armies recorded in chronicles, only mounds of soil and clay, raised by thousands of hands over centuries. When early European settlers first saw them, they thought they must have been the work of a lost race, perhaps Egyptians or Phoenicians who had crossed the sea. The truth was simpler and deeper. The builders were the ancestors of the native peoples already living there. Their monuments were not lost civilizations, they were memories of continuity. The earliest known of these is Poverty Point, near the Mississippi River in northeastern Louisiana. From the air, it forms concentric ridges in a great semicircle surrounding a central plaza. Built between 1700 and 1100 BCE, it was one of the first large-scale earthworks in North America. Its builders moved nearly 750,000 cubic meters of earth without wheels or draft animals, carrying it by hand in woven baskets. The largest mound, known as Mound A, stands 70 feet tall and stretches over 600 feet in length. Radiocarbon dating and soil analysis suggest that this massive structure was completed within a few months, a feat of organization that implies complex social coordination. Archaeological evidence shows that Poverty Point was a hub of trade. Stones and minerals found there, jasper, hematite, soapstone, and copper, came from as far away as the Great Lakes and the Appalachians. Clay figurines and cooking spheres, used to heat food, were discovered in abundance. Yet the site shows no signs of warfare. It was a ceremonial and trading center, not a fortress. From its mounds, astronomers could mark solstice sunrises and lunar cycles, turning Earth into a calendar just as accurately as stone circles in Europe. After Poverty Point declined, mound building did not vanish, it evolved. Across the Ohio River Valley, cultures known today as the Adena and later the Hopewell continued the tradition between 1000 BCE and 400 CE. They constructed conical burial mounds and geometric earthworks that defy simple explanation. At Newark, Ohio, a vast complex of circles, squares, and octagons spreads across 4 square miles. The precision of its design is astonishing. The octagon and circle are aligned to the northernmost and southernmost moonrises, an event that repeats only every 18.6 years. When viewed from the central mound, the moon appears to roll along the horizon exactly between the earthwork's edges. The builders understood celestial cycles with an accuracy matched only by ancient astronomers in Egypt or Babylon. The Hopewell people also built great mounds along the Scioto and Miami rivers. Inside these mounds, archaeologists have found copper effigies, mica cutouts, and finely crafted obsidian blades imported from the Rocky Mountains. Trade stretched over thousands of miles, forming what scholars call the Hopewell interaction sphere. Despite their scale, these sites show no fortifications, no evidence of centralized kingship or empire. They were ceremonial landscapes, shared by communities connected through ritual and exchange. By 900 CE, farther south along the Mississippi, a new era of mound building had begun. Near what is now St. Louis, Missouri, the city of Cahokia rose from the floodplain. Covering 6 square miles, it became the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico. At its height around 1100 CE, Cahokia may have held more than 20,000 inhabitants, larger than London at the same time. Its central structure, Monk's Mound, remains the largest earthen pyramid in the Americas, standing 100 feet tall and covering 14 acres. Cahokia's builders followed a deliberate urban plan. Excavations reveal residential neighborhoods, ceremonial plazas, and palisade walls enclosing the central complex. Nearby stood Woodhenge, a circular arrangement of red cedar posts used to track solstices and equinoxes. Archaeologist Warren Whittree first identified its astronomical function in the 1960 seconds. Standing at the center during sunrise, one could mark the changing seasons as the sun rose between specific posts. The sky was the city's clock and the earth its calendar. Unlike the stone cities of the Maya or the Andes, Cahokia was built entirely from soil-shaped, packed, and layered in geometric precision. Each mound required thousands of tons of clay carried in baskets from the surrounding floodplain. The labor was immense, but it left no record of slaves or forced construction. Instead, archaeologists believe the work was communal, part of ritual events that tied villages together through shared purpose. Artifacts found within Cahokia's mounds speak of wide networks and layered belief. Shell beads from the Gulf Coast, copper ornaments from the Great Lakes, and engraved stone tablets bearing bird and serpent imagery have been unearthed. The iconography, falcons, suns, and the birdman motif suggests a cosmology of balance between upper and lower worlds, life and death, earth and sky. Some mounds were burial sites for elite figures, buried with offerings and accompanied by human sacrifices. One of the most famous, Mound 72, contained the remains of a man laid upon a bed of shell beads shaped like a falcon. Nearby were the skeletons of young women and attendants, interred in symmetrical patterns. The ritual was not random, it was choreographed. By 1200 CE, Cahokia began to decline. Floods, deforestation, and social stress likely played roles. As the Mississippi changed course, so too did its people. The mounds remained, their smooth shapes softening under centuries of rain. Smaller mound centers continued to rise farther south and east. The Mississippian cultures of Etowah, Moundville, and Spiro carried the tradition forward, each with its own symbols and alignments. At Spiro Mounds in Oklahoma, a hollow chamber yielded thousands of artifacts: shell masks, copper plates, textiles preserved by clay. Among them was a depiction of a winged warrior, the Birdman, whose image appears from Florida to Illinois, a shared spiritual language spanning the continent. When Europeans arrived in the 16th century, they found villages still built near ancient mound sites. The people remembered them not as ruins, but as sacred places. In Choctaw tradition, the mounds were where the first people emerged from the earth. For the Natchez, mounds were thrones for their sons and chiefs. These stories, passed through centuries, kept memory alive even when the builders' names faded. Today, satellite imaging reveals that hundreds of mound sites once dotted the Mississippi Basin, from Wisconsin to the Gulf. Many were leveled by farming and development before their significance was known. Those that survive stand silent among modern highways and fields, their forms nearly erased, but their alignment still precise. They remain as testimony to societies that understood geometry without writing, astronomy without telescopes, and architecture without stone. In the quiet before dawn, mist gathers over the mounds. The landscape appears as a pattern of rising shapes, geometry made of earth. The same stars that guided the builders still hang overhead, their cycles unchanged. The mounds breathe with time, holding in their layers the pulse of a civilization that measured greatness not by conquest, but by alignment between people, planet, and sky. The desert architects, in the dry lands of the American Southwest, where heat ripples through the horizon and wind whispers across ancient stone, people once built cities that rose directly from the desert floor. They had no rivers like the Nile, no steady rains, and yet they transformed arid landscapes into networks of canals, dwellings, and observatories. For more than 1,000 years, civilizations like the Hohokam, the Mogollon, and the ancestral Puebloans engineered one of the most improbable feats in pre-Columbian America, thriving without fertile soil or constant water. Near modern-day Phoenix, the Salt and Gila rivers once flowed across a wide valley. Here, between 300 BCE and 1400 CE, the Hohokam built hundreds of miles of irrigation canals, some up to 20 meters wide and 15 kilometers long. These were hand-dug with stone tools, carefully sloped to maintain flow, and reinforced with clay and gravel. At its height, the canal system supported tens of thousands of people. The water fed fields of maize, beans, squash, and cotton. Archaeologists tracing the channels with ground-penetrating radar found that many still align perfectly with the modern irrigation lines that supply the Phoenix Basin today. The modern city's water grid quietly mirrors the pattern laid down by its earliest inhabitants. The Hohokam built platform mounds and ball courts at the centers of their towns, circular depressions similar in form to those found in Mesoamerica. Artifacts like macaw feathers, copper bells, and seashells from the Pacific show trade with distant regions, reaching as far as central Mexico. Their villages were low, rectangular adobe houses grouped around plazas. The largest, Snake Town, covered over 200 acres and may have held 3,000 residents. Its excavations revealed tens of thousands of ceramic vessels, finely polished and painted with geometric patterns in red and cream. The designs echo waves, spirals, and stepped motifs, symbols that seem to link water, wind, and movement. Farther north, the Mogollon culture flourished in the mountains of southern New Mexico and eastern Arizona. From 200 CE onward, they built pit houses partially sunk into the ground, insulated from the desert heat. Over centuries, these evolved into above-ground structures of stone and adobe. At sites like Paquime, also known as Casas Grandes, in northern Chihuahua, Mexico, the Mogollon constructed multi-story complexes with hundreds of rooms, T-shaped doorways, and ceremonial ball courts. Parrot breeding pens found there held scarlet macaws, whose feathers were traded northward, suggesting a network that linked desert settlements to tropical lowlands hundreds of miles away. The desert builders were not isolated. Across the plateau, the ancestral Puebloans, often called the Anasazi, rose around 750 CE. Their homeland stretched from Mesa Verde in Colorado to Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. Here, architecture reached monumental precision. Chaco's great houses, such as Pueblo Bonito, rose 4 and 5 stories high, enclosing more than 600 rooms arranged in semicircular forms. The walls were built from sandstone blocks, stacked in thin layers, with timber beams carried from forests over 70 kilometers away. Each structure was aligned with celestial events, doorways that framed the rising and setting sun at solstices, walls that matched lunar standstills occurring only once every 18.6 years. Archaeologists studying Chaco's layout found that its major buildings are aligned not only to the sky, but also to each other, forming a pattern across the canyon that reflects both geography and cosmology. The roads extending from Chaco straight, wide, and deliberate cut through the desert for miles. Some lead to outlying villages, others to shrines or cliffs with spiral petroglyphs that mark sun and shadow. The builders used geometry not as ornament, but as communication. At Fajada Butte, a sandstone mesa rising from the desert floor, 3 large stone slabs cast moving patterns of light onto a spiral carved into the rock. This feature, known today as the sun dagger, marks both the summer and winter solstices with a shaft of light that pierces the spiral's center. Discovered in 1977 by Anna Sofer, it revealed the Puebloans' advanced understanding of solar and lunar cycles. Through simple stone placement and careful observation, they created a calendar in light. The desert, however, is both a teacher and a destroyer. By the 1200s, environmental stress began to change these cultures. Prolonged droughts, dried canals, and emptied reservoirs. The Hohokam abandoned many of their villages. The ancestral Puebloans moved from Chaco to the cliffs of Mesa Verde, building compact stone dwellings tucked into canyon walls. The structures at Cliff Palace and Spruce Tree House show both beauty and defense doorways, narrowing, water cisterns hidden deep within rock. These cliff cities housed hundreds of people, protected from the sun and winds, but by 1300 CE, they too were deserted. Archaeological evidence points to a combination of factors: drought, soil depletion, social tension, and migration toward the Rio Grande valleys. Yet none of these collapses were endings. The descendants of these peoples still live across the region. The Hopi, Zuni, and Pueblo communities keeping alive the ceremonies and architectural principles of their ancestors. Many of their kivas, circular subterranean chambers used for ritual gatherings, preserve the same proportions found in ancient sites. The sipapu, a small hole in the floor symbolizing emergence from the underworld, appears in every kiva, unchanged across a millennium. In their language and ritual, the desert architecture continues to breathe. Modern archaeologists and engineers studying these ancient systems often remark on their sustainability. The Hohokam canals reused floodwater without overdrawing rivers. The Puebloans designed buildings to maintain constant temperature through thermal mass and orientation. Their techniques echo modern passive solar design. They built within limits, not against them. Standing at Chaco Canyon at dusk, one sees stone glowing red against the empty sky. The wind moves through doorways aligned with vanished suns. The silence feels engineered, intentional. The ancient canals have turned to dry lines of pale sand, but their patterns remain visible from the air. The desert architects mastered scarcity by precision, making architecture both shelter and instrument. Their legacy lies not in towering monuments, but in balance, the ability to build within the rhythm of a place. Every canal, every terrace, every kiva was an act of negotiation with the landscape, written in clay, maintained by patience. The desert remembers through geometry and shadow, holding its history not in inscriptions, but in the quiet endurance of form. The forgotten giants of the Pacific coast. Along the Pacific coastline, from the mouth of the Columbia River to the estuaries of central California, remnants of ancient societies still rest beneath the dunes and tidal flats. Long before the first European ships crossed the Pacific, long before maps gave these shores their names, people were building coastal cities of wood, shell, and earth civilizations shaped by tides rather than stone. For thousands of years, the Pacific coast supported vast populations who lived by the rhythm of the ocean, leaving behind monuments not of masonry, but of accumulation, mounds of shell, bone, and charcoal that grew layer by layer into sacred ground. The oldest traces appear in California's Channel Islands. Archaeological sites on Santa Rosa and San Miguel reveal human habitation stretching back over 13,000 years. On Santa Rosa, the skeletal remains of the Arlington Springs man, dated to around 11,000 BCE, mark one of the earliest known presences in North America. His descendants built fishing villages along the coasts, constructing plank houses from redwood and pine, lashed together with kelp rope. The Chumash, who later occupied the region, built Tomol's plank canoes sealed with asphaltum, harvested from natural tar seeps. With them, they navigated the Santa Barbara Channel, trading shell beads and fish hooks of abalone with mainland tribes. These maritime networks form one of the earliest ocean-based economies in the Americas. Farther north, near the San Francisco Bay, vast shell mounds known as middens once rose along the shoreline. In the 1800s, more than 400 were documented, some over 30 feet high and spanning hundreds of feet in width. To early settlers they appeared as natural hills, but excavations revealed dense layers of shell, bone, and artifacts, each stratum representing centuries of habitation. The largest, the Emeryville Shell Mound, stood like a man-made island at the edge of the bay. Archaeologists discovered finely worked obsidian blades, fishing weights and beads, alongside burials positioned with ceremonial care. Radiocarbon dating placed its earliest layers around 2500 BCE, making it older than many Egyptian temples. The mound was both refuse heap and ritual monument, a living record of community and continuity. The coast's abundance allowed stability without farming. Salmon, shellfish, sea mammals, and gathered plants provided steady food sources. Societies here measured time by tides, not harvests. Yet they developed complex social hierarchies, specialized craftsmanship, and regional trade systems. The Chumash, Salinan, and Ohlone peoples of California used shell beads as currency. Each bead's value depended on uniformity and shine. Production required precision, and archaeological finds of bead workshops suggest standardized economic systems older than many urban markets of the Old World. Moving north along the rugged Oregon and Washington coasts, the landscape shifts to temperate rainforest. Here, the climate preserved what deserts could not: wood, fiber, and rope. The ancient peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast built monumental wooden architecture. Longhouses of cedar planks carved and painted with clan emblems. Each longhouse could stretch over 60 feet, housing extended families under a single roof. At sites along the Fraser River and Puget Sound, wooden stakes, fish weirs, and traps dating to 1000 BCE still lie preserved in mud. Radiocarbon samples from the lower Fraser Valley indicate organized salmon management as early as 4000 BCE, one of the world's oldest examples of engineered fisheries. The region's artistry matched its engineering. Massive cedar poles, later known as totem poles, rose at the entrances of these plank villages. Though many were carved in later centuries, their form has ancient origins. Archaeologists studying coastal petroglyphs and wooden fragments from Prince of Wales Island found motifs of thunderbirds, whales, and bears, dating back at least 2,000 years. These were not mere decorations, they encoded lineage, territory, and spiritual power. Each carving was both map and memory, linking human ancestry to the natural world. Trade flowed along the entire coast: obsidian from interior volcanoes, copper from British Columbia, dentalium shells from Vancouver Island, and woven baskets from California moved through hands connected by kinship and ceremony. Canoes carved from single cedar trunks could hold dozens of people and cross open waters. Maritime archaeologist Dale Crows, studying waterlogged sites at Ozette on the Olympic Peninsula, uncovered over 50,000 artifacts preserved by a landslide that buried the village around 1500 CE. Wooden combs, woven mats, carved masks, and fishing tools lay as they were left, an entire coastal world frozen in mud. Further north, near the mouth of the Skeena River, the ancient site of Kitwanga reveals defensive terraces and longhouse remains. Oral histories among the Gitxsan and Haida recall fortified villages, alliances, and feasts of exchange known as potlatches rituals, where wealth was distributed rather than hoarded. These traditions, still practiced today, originate from social systems that had stabilized along the coast for millennia. Their abundance of salmon and cedar supported dense populations comparable to urban centers elsewhere. In Alaska's coastal valleys, the remains of fish traps and storage pits stretch for miles. On Kodiak Island, 19th century Russian explorers reported seeing mounds and trenches from earlier cultures, whose origins no one remembered. Modern excavation revealed that some of these earthworks were once house foundations, layered over centuries. Beneath them, carved wooden masks and whalebone tools point to continuous occupation going back at least 7,000 years. Unlike stone cities or pyramids, the Pacific coast civilizations left monuments meant to return to nature. Wood rotted, earth shifted, shells turned to powder. Their architecture was cyclical, designed to be replaced and reborn. What survived was not material endurance, but spatial memory, the placement of villages at river mouths, the same fishing grounds, the same lines of trade. The people who lived here measured permanence not by the immovable, but by the repeatable. Standing at low tide near modern Emeryville, one can still see fragments of oyster shell gleaming among the rocks. In the forests of the northwest, cedar trunks rise where longhouses once stood. The silence that fills these spaces is not absence. It is the quiet rhythm of a culture that lived in harmony with the pulse of the sea. Their cities were never lost beneath stone, but absorbed back into the cycles they respected. To the ocean peoples of the Pacific coast, the world was built from breath and tide. They raised their monuments in wood and song, not to defy nature, but to move within it. The forgotten giants of this shore left behind no empires, no carved names, only the enduring geometry of coastlines, the faint hum of surf over buried villages, and the knowledge that civilization can thrive without conquering the land it calls home. The roads beneath the volcanoes, across the deserts and high plateaus of Peru, where the ground burns red beneath the sun and distant mountains release slow plumes of white steam, lie the lines, geometric paths cut into the earth, so vast they can only be seen from the air. From above, the Nazca Desert reveals patterns of animals, spirals, and long parallel roads etched into the surface of the pampa. To those who first saw them from early aircraft in the 1,920 seconds, they seemed too perfect to be ancient. Yet they are older than most cities of the Andes. The Nazca lines, carved between 500 BCE and 500 CE, mark a civilization that built not in stone but in silence, using the desert itself as its canvas. Each figure was made by removing the dark layer of iron-stained stones from the desert surface, exposing the pale earth beneath. The designs range from straight lines stretching for kilometers to vast figures, a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey, and forms whose purpose remains uncertain. The lines have barely eroded after 2 millennia, preserved by the absence of rain and the steadiness of wind. Archaeologist Maria Reicher devoted her life to measuring them, living in a small hut near the plateau. She believed they were an astronomical calendar, aligning with solstices and stars. Later studies showed that some do align with celestial points, while others follow underground water channels, suggesting dual meanings: sky above, water below. The Nazca were not alone in their vision of geometry. To the south, along the Paracas Peninsula, an earlier culture had already begun shaping land into ritual design. The Paracas Candelabra, an enormous geoglyph carved into a hillside facing the Pacific measures, over 180 meters tall. Visible from miles offshore, it may have served as a navigational marker for sailors, or a symbolic representation of lightning, the staff god, or hallucinogenic plants. Its exact meaning remains unknown. Radiocarbon dating places it around 200 BCE. The Paracas culture also left behind intricate woven textiles, dyed with colors that have survived 20 centuries. Each cloth is patterned with serpents, condors, and humanoid figures, their forms echoing the same symmetry seen in the later Nazca lines. The land they inhabited was shaped by fire and drought. Along the coast, the desert receives less than an inch of rain each year, yet just inland, mountain streams descend from the Andes, creating narrow green valleys. Here, both Paracas and Nazca peoples built canals to divert river water to their fields. Some canals, known as puquios, still function today. They consist of underground aqueducts lined with stone, ventilated by spiral shafts that descend into the earth. From above, these spirals look like coiled shells, a living symbol of continuity between air and water, heaven and earth. Farther inland, the Andes rise sharply, their peaks crowned with snow, their bases streaked with volcanic ash. In this volatile region, other cultures thrived by building with adaptation rather than defiance. The Wari, emerging around 600 CE near modern-day Ayacucho, constructed cities on high plateaus prone to earthquakes. They developed a road system that predated the Inca by centuries, stone-paved routes stretching across mountains and valleys. These roads, later absorbed into the Inca network, connected administrative centers, temples, and agricultural terraces. The Wari combined military order with environmental awareness, building storage houses, canals, and walls that absorbed seismic tremors through interlocking masonry. Archaeological excavations at Piquilacta, one of their major centers, revealed a grid layout with rectangular compounds and long corridors paved in stone. Its water system carried runoff from the hills through a series of channels and reservoirs. The precision recalls Tiwanaku's hydraulic architecture on the Altiplano, suggesting shared knowledge between distant highland cultures. Though separated by hundreds of kilometers, their methods aligned in principle: control water, follow the land, respect the sky. Volcanoes dominated the horizons of their world. The Andes are part of the most seismically active chain on Earth, a landscape constantly reshaped by eruptions and quakes. To build here required both resilience and ritual. Temples near Arequipa and the Colca Valley show altars oriented toward volcano summits. Offerings of textiles, gold leaf, and animal bones were buried to appease mountain spirits known as apis. Centuries later, the Inca would continue these practices, performing Capacocha ceremonies on summits above 6,000 meters, sacrifices meant to balance the forces of earth and sky. In the same valleys, one finds remnants of earlier experimentation. Terraces carved into volcanic slopes, each retaining wall stacked with small stones to allow water drainage. These terraces, known as andines, multiplied arable land and stabilized fragile soil. Some date back to pre-Wari times. The use of altitude as a farming system allowed the growth of diverse crops: potatoes, maize, quinoa, each planted at specific elevations to match microclimates. This vertical agriculture, later perfected by the Inca, was an invention born of necessity in a land where every meter of altitude meant a different world. As centuries passed, the highland road systems connected distant regions: the Pacific coast, the mountain valleys, and the jungles beyond. By the 10th century, when Tiwanaku declined, the Wari routes had already become arteries of commerce and communication. Traces of ancient travelers appear in the form of rest stops, tambos spaced at regular intervals, offering shelter and water. Some of these structures were later reused by Inca messengers, the chasquis, who could run hundreds of kilometers carrying messages encoded on knotted cords. The legacy of these builders lies not only in their structures, but in their understanding of instability. They built where the ground moved, where rivers dried, where volcanoes watched from every direction. Their roads curved gently around slopes, never forcing a straight line against the terrain. Their cities were not meant to defy the earth, but to move with it. Even the Nazca lines, those immense shapes across the desert, follow subtle gradients invisible to the eye, preserving balance between art and geography. Today, standing on a ridge above Nazca, the wind carries fine dust across the plateau, tracing faint paths that shimmer in the heat. From the ground, the lines seem meaningless. Only from the sky do they reveal order. Planes passing overhead cast shifting shadows across the geoglyphs, shadows that move like time itself. The same sun that guided the builders still rises over the Andes, warming the red soil that hides the oldest roads of the Americas. From desert coast to volcanic ridge, these civilizations learned one lesson: to live with the motion of the world. They built not to conquer time, but to mark its passage, to leave patterns that would remain even when the cities were gone, when the rivers had shifted, and when the earth beneath them had changed again. The empire of threads and stone, high in the spine of the Andes, where the peaks rise into thin white air and clouds slide like slow rivers through the valleys, a small people of herders and builders once gathered under a sun they called Inti. By the 13th century, they were known as the Inca. Within 2 centuries, they would weave an empire that stretched for more than 2,500 miles, from the deserts of Chile to the jungles of Ecuador, binding together millions of people across mountains, rivers, and languages. They did it without wheels, without writing, and without iron. Their tools were stone and fiber, their empire built as much through communication as through conquest. The Inca called their land Tawantinsuyu, the realm of 4 quarters. At its center stood Cusco, a city laid out in the shape of a puma. Every road began there, radiating toward distant provinces. To the Inca, Cusco was not just a capital, it was the heart of the world. From its central plaza, stone walls rose in precise angles, their blocks fitted so tightly that no blade of grass could fit between them. The architecture seemed to grow from the earth itself. The builders used no mortar, shaping granite by rubbing and pounding with harder stones until surfaces joined seamlessly. Many of these walls still stand, surviving centuries of earthquakes that shattered modern structures around them. The empire's greatest achievement was not a single city or temple, but its road system, the Kapak Yan. This network of paths and stone highways stretched for more than 25,000 miles, crossing deserts, jungles, and snowfields. Rope suspension bridges spanned deep gorges, their fibers woven from ichu grass and renewed annually in ceremonies that continue even today. Along the roads, relay runners called chasqui carried messages encoded in bundles of colored strings known as quipus. Through these cords, information passed from province to capital at remarkable speed. A runner could cover 150 miles in a day, handing messages from one to the next. The system was so efficient that fresh fish from the coast could reach Cusco, over 300 miles inland, still moist with salt. The quipu, from the Quechua word meaning knot, was the empire's memory. Each cord carried numerical and administrative data through the placement and color of its knots. The Inca used them to record census counts, storehouse inventories, and tribute lists. Some scholars believe the cords may also have carried narrative meaning, a tactile form of writing still only partially understood. Spanish chroniclers described quipu masters reading them aloud, reciting history as their fingers moved along the threads. No other civilization in the Americas achieved such a system, an empire managed not with ink, but with fiber. At the heart of Inca religion was reciprocity, the belief that every gift, every harvest, every act of construction was part of a balance between humans and the world. Their rituals honored the sun, the mountains, and the ancestors. The Temple of the Sun in Cusco, called Coricancha, was once plated in sheets of gold that reflected light into the valley. Its walls were aligned to capture the first rays of the winter solstice, marking the rebirth of the sun. The Inca observed the heavens with the same precision they applied to their architecture. Stone towers outside the city, known as sucancas, served as solar observatories, each pillar aligned with a sunrise or sunset that defined the agricultural calendar. In the highlands, architecture and terrain became one. Terraces and Andenes cascaded down the mountains, each level creating its own microclimate. The stones held heat through the cold nights, extending the growing season. Crops like potatoes, quinoa, and maize thrived at altitudes where agriculture should have been impossible. The terraces were supported by a network of canals and aqueducts that carried water from snowmelt streams. Archaeologists studying these systems found gradients precise to the centimeter, allowing perfect flow without erosion. The Inca did not just occupy the Andes, they sculpted them. Their greatest urban creation was Machu Picchu, built in the 15th century during the reign of Pachacuti. Perched on a ridge 8,000 feet above sea level, it remained hidden from the outside world for centuries. Its stairways, temples, and agricultural terraces cling to the mountainside as if they grew there naturally. Each building aligns with astronomical events. The Intihuatana stone marks the sun's zenith. The Temple of the Three Windows faces the sunrise during the June solstice. Even its drainage system, invisible to the casual eye, was engineered to handle tropical rainfall without flooding. When American explorer Hiram Bingham arrived in 1911, guided by local farmers, he believed he had found the lost capital of the Incas. In truth, Machu Picchu was more likely a royal estate or sacred retreat, a testament to harmony between human intention and natural form. Beyond architecture, the Inca Empire was held together by logistics. Every province contributed goods to state storehouses, potatoes from the highlands, maize from the valleys, textiles from the coast. These were redistributed in times of famine or for military campaigns. The empire's administrative efficiency impressed even its conquerors. Chronicler Pedro de Chiesa de Leon wrote in 1553, "There was no famine, nor idleness, nor want in the days of the Inca." This prosperity rested on collective labor, called mita, through which citizens contributed time to public works in exchange for food and security. Yet this order was fragile. When the Spanish arrived in 1532, they found an empire weakened by civil war between two brothers Atahualpa and Huascar, each claiming the throne. The roads that had once united the realm now carried armies against each other. Within a year, the empire fell. Yet even conquest could not erase its foundations. The roads remained, the terraces still produced food, and the language of administration Quechua continued to be spoken across the Andes. Modern archaeologists walking the Inca trails describe a sense of design that feels both human and cosmic. The paths follow contours, never forcing straight lines against the land. Stone steps rise where slopes grow steep, and at each bend, small shrines overlook the valleys. It was a system built not just for travel, but for meaning. The Inca saw geography as sacred text. Every mountain, every river, every bend in the trail had a spirit, a memory, a name. Today, fragments of that empire remain alive. Farmers in the Sacred Valley still plant on terraces their ancestors built. In villages near Cusco, the annual rebuilding of the Quesuachaca Bridge, woven entirely from grass, continues as a living ritual of renewal. When the bridge is completed, villagers cross it singing, as their forebears once did, joining the two sides of the canyon with threads. The empire of the Inca was one of precision, reciprocity, and endurance. Its stones were shaped by hand, its empire by memory. What remains is not only the grandeur of architecture, but the quiet perfection of order, the hum of footsteps along ancient paths, the whisper of wind between walls that have survived both conquest and time. The earth that remembers. When explorers first gazed upon the Americas, they described what they saw as wilderness. To them, the endless forests, plains without visible cities, and rivers that wound through untamed valleys seemed untouched by civilization. But what appeared empty was not empty at all. Beneath the soil, beneath the quiet rhythm of wind and leaf, the land itself carried the imprint of ancient design. Every plain, terrace, and delta was part of a map drawn long before their arrival, a continent written in earth, shaped by hands that have since vanished into time. Across the Amazon basin, satellite imaging and LiDAR have revealed what centuries of myth and speculation could not: geometry beneath the trees. Circles, squares, ditches, and causeways stretch for miles under the canopy, too vast and deliberate to be accidents of erosion. Beneath the living forest lies a record of an older, managed world. The soil itself tells the story. Patches of rich, dark earth known as terra preta, or black earth, mark ancient habitation zones. This soil is artificial, created through the mixing of charcoal, ash, pottery shards, and organic waste. It regenerates rather than depletes, sustaining fertility for centuries. In some parts of the forest, farmers still grow crops on the same black earth their ancestors engineered 2,000 years ago. The Amazon, long imagined as pristine wilderness, was once a mosaic of managed ecosystems, an enormous living city built not from stone, but from soil, water, and light. The Andean mountains remember in terraces. From Ecuador to Bolivia, slopes that seem naturally stepped are in fact carved fields and deans built by countless generations to hold water and prevent erosion. From above, their curves follow the contours of the ridges like the rings of a fingerprint. At different altitudes, the temperature changes by a degree with every 100 meters. The ancient farmers understood this and used it to create vertical agriculture: maize below, potatoes above, quinoa higher still. The mountains became layered gardens, each terrace its own ecosystem. Even after centuries of neglect, these terraces remain stable, their stones still holding the weight of time and rain. Far to the south, the desert keeps its memories through absence. The Nazca and Paracas lines, drawn between 500 BCE and 500 CE, still stretch across Peru's dry plains. They form spirals, animals, and endless straight paths that never fade, preserved by the still air and the lack of rain. From the ground, they appear as random paths. From the sky, they resolve into patterns that mirror constellations, solstices, and the flow of underground water. Maria Reich, who spent decades measuring and protecting them, once said that they were a map between heaven and earth. To the desert builders, art, astronomy, and survival were one. Northward, the plains of the Mississippi and the Ohio rise in earthen mounds that soften with morning fog. Poverty Point, Cahokia, and the vast Hopewell earthworks once shaped landscapes of ceremony and trade, their circular and octagonal mounds aligned with the moon's 18.6-year cycle. The builders carried soil by hand in baskets, forming monuments large enough to outlast empires. Their geometry matches that of distant lands, angles and ratios that appear again in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Andes, proof not of contact, but of a shared human instinct to understand the cosmos through form. Along the Pacific coast, the memory of civilization lies in the shell mounds, wooden posts, and eroded ridges where plank-built villages once stood. The people of California, Oregon, and the Pacific Northwest built their monuments from what the sea offered: cedar, shell, and fishbone. Their architecture did not defy decay, it embraced it. Villages were rebuilt in the same places for thousands of years, each generation layering its homes atop the last. The land itself became archive, holding the weight of repeated lives. What survived was patterned: the placement of houses, the curves of weirs, the orientation of poles carved with whales and thunderbirds. Even after the buildings rotted, the design endured. Across the continent, these ancient forms, roads, mounds, terraces, canals, lines, speak to one shared truth. The builders were not isolated peoples creating by chance. They were participants in a long, unbroken conversation between humanity and landscape. Every civilization, though separated by oceans and mountains, discovered the same language of balance. Their structures follow celestial points. Their canals follow gravity. Their cities follow light. None relied on machines or blueprints. They relied on observation, on the slow patience of generations learning how water moves, how sun shadows fall, how earth settles after rain. Modern archaeology is beginning to understand that the Americas were not an untouched wilderness before contact, but a continent of living systems maintained through care. The forests of the Amazon grew in designed mosaics of edible trees. The grasslands of the Midwest were managed by fire, renewed with purpose. The mountains of Peru were terraces of stone that turned scarcity into abundance. The people who lived here did not separate nature from civilization. They saw them as one continuous structure. Even where names have vanished, proportion remains. The walls of Tiwanaku still align with the solstice sunrise. The canals of the Hohokam near Phoenix still carry water along their ancient paths. The terraces of the Andes still grow crops. The shell mounds beside California's bays still curve like crescent moons. Every forgotten site repeats the same quiet principle. To endure, one must build with the earth, not against it. Beneath the surface of time, these civilizations are linked not by empire or war, but by rhythm. The Maya tracked Venus and rainfall. The Inca measured stars and terraces. The Hopewell followed the moon. Their monuments were calendars disguised as cities, and their rituals were systems of maintenance. Even their collapses were forms of renewal cultures withdrawing into forest or plain, leaving space for the land to breathe before new cycles began. Today, as satellites scan the continent from orbit, the outlines return. What the forest concealed for centuries now glows faintly on our screens. Road grids under jungle canopy, circular plazas beneath farmland, geometric embankments buried by rivers. Each rediscovery is less revelation than reminder. The earth remembers more than we do. At dusk in the Andes, light moves across the terraces in slow waves. In the Mississippi Valley, mist gathers over mounds that mirror constellations above. Across the Pacific coast, tides whisper against ancient shell ridges, and deep within the Amazon, the soil still breathes the same black earth cultivated by unseen hands thousands of years ago. The landscape itself is memory, vast and living, written in elevation, angle, and silence. What we call ruins were never abandoned. They are the planet's long recollection of cooperation. Every civilization that rose here shared one idea, that permanence does not come from conquest or stone, but from harmony. To build something eternal, one must build something the earth is willing to keep. The Americas were never a blank page. They were already a manuscript, each valley, river, and plain a chapter of design and adaptation. Beneath every forest, every modern city, the old geometry persists. The earth keeps its archive quietly, recording in terraces, canals, and soil what people once learned and left behind. When the wind moves through the Andes or across the desert plains, it passes over lines, ridges, and mounds that still answer the sun. They do not speak of vanished empires, but of continuity, of civilizations that built with patience, knowing the land would remember. The stones, the rivers, the soil they are, the archives of human intention. And when we listen closely, through silence and dust, the world still whispers their final message. We were here, we built with care, and the earth remembered. Across this vast continent, the traces remain lines beneath the desert, terraces carved into stone, canals that still guide rivers, and mounds that rise through mist. Every ruin is a sentence in a language the earth still speaks. The builders are gone, yet their design endures in the soil, in the wind, and in the quiet rhythm of time. What they created was not just civilization, but continuity, an understanding that to build something eternal, one must build with the world, not against it. If you found peace in their silence and wonder in their endurance, stay with us for more forgotten histories told in the quiet language of time. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let these ancient stories follow you into sleep. The world is still full of memory waiting beneath the dust, whispering through stone, reminding us that nothing built with care is ever truly lost.